I mean, I thought it'd be fun to do something a little bit lighter and just look a little bit at the future. Now, just to introduce myself, my name is Miguel Branco. I'm a techie. I'm a developer. I'm a CTO primarily. And the reason I want to mention that, right, that's actually my GitHub, commit history. And the reason I want to mention that is because as I'm giving a talk, right, you have to understand I'm starting from the standpoint of somebody who's technical, right? So I'm like looking at the future, look at the technology, not just so much from the perspective of the problems that exist that we need to solve, but actually from the technology, right, and what will become possible. And that's a little bit what this talk is about, and that's why I just wanted to have that disclaimer out of the way. I'm not talking about these specific problems we have to solve. I'm just fascinated with the tech and what we can build and what will happen with it. And, just to start with that, I think it's the starting point when you look at the future, right, you look at trends. And it's always important to understand, right, what happens as technology matures. So we've been building APIs for quite some time now, of course. But you have this in all other domains. So what happens, as we start doing these things for quite some time. And the first thing that tends to happen is specialization. You see this everywhere, and I'm just taking the example from Apple, the M1 chip, right? You just look at your phone. It used to be a very simple device to some extent. And, as we go over in time, it starts to be extremely specialized. And actually, if you look just at the CPU, the compute part, it's now a very tightly packaged, ecosystem almost of co-processors, right? You have the classical CPU cores. Now you have high efficiency ones. You have high performance ones. But you start having all these compute units, in there that didn't exist. Of course, machine learning accelerators. Cryptographic acceleration, that didn't exist many years ago, right? Of course, high-performance video editing, and so on and so forth, right? And the reason we do that is obvious, right? Is because as we specialize, we just give the best experience, the best performance, and the best security. So we do that for a reason. And I guess you see where I'm going, right, with APIs. We'll find analogy there. The second one is, the second part that typically happens as technology matures is that everyone has access to it. Basically, that's kind of in the title of the talk, democratization. In this case, sort of allowing everyone to build APIs. The mobile phone example works pretty well here as well, right? Now we all have them, used to be something very exclusive. And in the case of APIs, I guess the same thing is going to happen, and you'll get to it. By the way, just as a side note, if you look at an image, that's actually generated by DALL-E. Who is famous? Who is familiar with it? The Open API stuff? Okay. It's actually pretty cool if you have two presentations because you get some nice, unique images out of it. Now, the reason that people will start, everyone quotes, between quotes, will be building APIs is because there's actually business value in doing so, right? Not just because it's interesting to us, the techies. And there's actually a couple of quotes from Gartner just supporting this, right? And that's just an example of one type of use for APIs, right? So in this case, by 2023, this comes again from Gartner, organizations that promote data sharing, and typical way you do data sharing is actually with APIs, will outperform their peers in most business metrics. And that's a really good reason to be building more APIs. So if you are an organization and you have data internally that you could monetize, share, take advantage of it, well, there's a very good reasons to do it and start doing some APIs around it. And of course, again, one more, just to emphasize the same story. Leaders who share data externally generate 3 times more measurable economic benefit than those who do not. Again, more monetization opportunities, more business opportunities. And you start to see that already, because if you look at API traffic, the API traffic grew 300% faster than the web traffic in 2020. That's actually pretty impressive to see because there's just so much web traffic, right? But it actually makes sense, right? In the sense that machines talk to each other much faster than humans do, right? And this will just keep growing, right? As we integrate more products, more systems, more services together. And the other part about it, that you're just gonna have everyone, and by everyone I just mean a lot more people. It's just a growth on the number of developers. Now that's sort of the final part of democratization. I was trying to find accurate figures on the number of developers worldwide, pro developers or citizen developers. It's very, very hard to find exact numbers, right? It's super hard. One thing that they all have in common, all the studies that we could find, is that there's an exponential curve somewhere. And I was actually not fully aware of that, right? But it's absolutely exponential. And this, of course, is to a large extent driven by citizen developers. Those are the ones growing the most. But I did find one fact that I wanted to share with you, a number that I find staggering. 20.5 million new developers joined GitHub in 2022 alone. So that's 20 million people. I mean, that's amazing if you're GitHub, right? But just for the community at large, right? Because a lot of this is also open source. This, by the way, comes from GitHub's Octoverse report from 2022. And that's, I think, a 20% growth. It's an absolutely astonishing number. And these people will be writing code. They will be, building APIs. So you just see what's coming, right? So now it's turning into APIs per se, right? So we talked about specialization. That tends to happen as technology matures, and democratization tends to happen. But how will this go about in APIs, right? Let's now link back to our particular domain. How will this happen? And now it's where you start speculating, right? So now the following is very much my opinion. So thanks for coming and listening to it, right? And the first one on specialization, I think what's going to happen is the emergence of far more specialized platforms as a service. And I think this is going to be the answer. This is going to be how it's going to happen. So for instance, what I mean by this is platforms that are designed, to build, host, manage specific classes, specific types of APIs. Now, when you talk about, API architecture, I think it's MuleSoft, right? They have these three layers: the system APIs that wrap the data sources, the process APIs that do the business logic, and forgot the name, experience APIs on top, right? Now, that could be one answer, right? Where every one of these layers, you start having very specific solutions to address each specific layer of the architecture. I think more interesting than that, and it's kind of what I'm leaning to, is more where you have, very specific platforms for specific types of use cases. For instance, if you want to optimize serving data to an internal team, say to feed an AI model or to serve data to a dashboard, that's actually quite different if you really try to push performance very hard, security very hard, of somebody who's trying to build an API to share data with their customers, right? Or trying to monetize data. I mean, you're building APIs, yes, but once you get to the details of the ecosystem around it, I think you end up with very distinct solutions. Like with everything, there are common building blocks, right? In the same way that your iPhone has common building blocks with your desktop. But once you get to the details of it, there's actually quite a big difference. All these co-processes around are actually quite different. And how will this specialized API, platforms as a service looks like? They would be, in my opinion, all in one, full stack, right? Optimized for purpose. I guess that's all I'm saying. They are then designed for and optimized for very specific use cases. So again, think about your, API. I'll have a few examples just next, so I don't have to elaborate now. They will be definitely low code, no code, perhaps low code. I suspect they're going to be using domain-specific programming languages, and I will explain why just after. And of course, the whole process will be much more tightly coupled, right? The development, the hosting, the management, this will all be integrated in. And they will not be isolated, right? Because if you do that and you'll be in a complete isolated platform, it will not be interesting, but they'll just be part of an open platform, an open ecosystem. So just play with this idea and come up with a more specific example, right? Let's see, again, APIs, an API platform as a service for data sharing. So data sharing is a place where I'll get to it in a moment, it's very dear to me and to actually the company I work for. But it's a place where you can build, host, manage APIs. So you want to share, some of your company's data with your customers, with your external partners, or with your suppliers. So what would happen if you went that approach and if you had a specific platform for that? I'm trying to do the analogy here with a sort of the M1 chip, although I don't have the graphic skills of the Apple people. But, of course, many of these components are common, but some will be very specialized, right? I suspect for data sharing, right, you would end up most likely with a declarative language, something with, foundations of SQL. Because if you're delivering data, that's just a much better way to do so, right? You will probably have a type-safe language because you probably care very deeply about that. You will have an ETL engine integrated with it because after all, you're delivering data. That data is coming from somewhere. And, you will likely have one last mile ETL process to do before you deliver your data. You will have a query engine because, again, you're doing data delivery. It makes sense that these things are integrated. Again, you may use solutions out there, but you're going to customize them, right? If you're building this specific platform. Of course, you have API gateway components, and you're going to have data inference engines because if you're, again, delivering data, it's quite likely you need tooling to help you discover what exists out there. You're going to have provenance engines. Of course, you have auditing and policy enforcement, but you may have, data leakage detection. You may have systems that even if you forget to define policies, may warn you that you did so. And that makes perfect sense in the context of sharing data to external parties. Might be less important internally, for instance, right? The weight of these and the composition of these services will be different. And of course, I suspect every system is going to have AI code assistance. I'll get into that. And other components, right? So that's just one example of what can happen if you start building very specialized, dedicated platforms or classes of APIs. So that's the part on specialization. One way it could go about. Now, how do we handle democratization? I think that one, in some way is a little bit easier, right, to understand. And I think the answer there is going to be basically AI-driven development. Well, I think we want, right, more people building APIs. I think that's a good thing, right? And if you're going to have more people building APIs, most likely many of these people will be less worried about design principles or architecture and more about the impact of their work, particularly if you're talking about citizen developers. And I think AI-driven development is actually a great answer here. And I want to show you why this is key. And actually, it's a very good complement to what we just spoke before on specialization. So what do I mean by AI-driven development? It's just sort of the next phase, right? It's where low-code tools are going to end up being, where we are interacting with an AI to build APIs together, basically. And these tools are now emerging. I don't know who here has used GitHub Copilot or knows about it. It's okay. And OpenAPI, I think we talked about DALL-E before. ChatGPT. Okay. Not everyone, right? Not everyone. But who hasn't used ChatGPT should definitely use it, right? I think it's one of these moments, right, that you go back in time and you see, okay, something special happened that day. Now, how will this, what will be the consequence, right? How will this exactly go about, right? One thing that I think is going to happen is that AI-driven development will definitely lead to an emergence of new languages and actually new visual tools, right? We need much higher level languages. We can't keep up with a machine that's dumping us 200 lines of JavaScript in a second. Every time you ask it to build an API to wrap an Oracle database. And that's actually something you can do today, right? And then, you ask it to change the return code of something and you have another 200 lines of code coming up again at a very quick speed, right? That's just not a good interface, right, between humans and machines anymore. And the same thing will happen if you're drawing boxes on the screen. So if you're using a no-code tool, right, where you just get your screen full of boxes. And you yourself will have a very hard time following what's happening, right? So we need to increase the level of abstraction. And, we need low-code tools, we need visualization tools that are high-level enough so that we can understand what's going on, right? Because the machine definitely has the capacity to, just overload us with information. And what's going to happen is that we become drivers, right? We are not implementers. We'll not be writing the codes. We'll be supervising it, right? We'll be doing actually the important part of signing it off and saying it's okay. We'll be pair programming effectively with an AI that will be doing most of the typing, and we're type checking it, we're guiding it. So we need systems that allows us to see through the noise, which you can't do in typical today's generation of programming languages. And it's not just about building APIs, right? It's about refactoring them. Refactoring tools are getting amazing, and we're still in the pre-AI generation of refactoring tools. And they're already amazing, right? We regularly use refactoring tools on very large code bases, and they perform incredibly well. What about migrating them? And here I wanted just to sort of take a moment and actually talk a little bit about what we're doing with my company, right? Because we do have a platform, right? This is what we're describing here is a vision to the future, but it's a vision we believe in, right? And we are invested in. And we do have a product. We'll have a workshop tomorrow on it. I'll mention it more at the end. And we do have a system with a domain-specific language for people to build, very easily, very quickly, very securely, to build APIs. And we have our own domain-specific language. And here's me in interaction with ChatGPT, which I think most people seem to be aware of, trying to explain it about a new programming language it has never seen before, because our language is new. ChatGPT is trained from date until 2020 or 2021, so there's no way it knows about anything about our system. And it's us, me trying to explain it, right? Let's assume there's a programming language called Snappy, which, by the way, that's what it's called. And it allows you to build, programs, APIs that serve data very quickly. Here's how you could read a CSV file. Here's how you can read a JSON file. Here's how a join works. By the way, here's a bit more syntax. That's how you declare variables, right? Declare variable A and B and sum them. So it's a functional language, right, the DSL. And then, ChatGPT dumps out some very reasonable explanation of what's going on. Very well. Okay, interesting. Now, second question. Okay, can you build me a program, an API effectively, right, that joins a CSV on S3 in this location with a JSON file on the web on that location? And that's the answer, right? And of course, for those who haven't seen ChatGPT, this is impressive, this is magic, right? This came out in half a second. That is perfectly correct program, right? That's a perfectly valid, you can deploy it, you can run it, you can sign up to our system and run this, and it works, right? And it actually provides explanation, right? This program uses CSV infer and read to read a CSV file, right? It detects the data type, that's why it's called infer and read. So it does automatic detection of column names and stuff like this. And then it does the same thing with JSON and does a collection join. It even gives an example with r.csv.id, which is ingenious because that's exactly how it works, right? And I just love the disclaimer at the end, right? This is just an example, may not be the exact syntax, because I'm not sure, right? But it actually is, and it works, right? And the second step, right, would be, okay, so, you can write snappy programs now, and they are pretty easy to understand. Can you convert this to Python? So you're trying to convert it from, a language you've never heard about onto a well-known programming language. And it tries, right? So then it produced this, right? And if you look at it, right, you'll figure out, okay, this is, ChatGPT is a language model. It's auto-completion on steroids, basically. But you see that there are mistakes here, right? And I'm not talking about the scalability part. It's a very simple Python script, but let's even ignore all that, right? But of course, that's not how you open an S3 file. You can't just do that. It doesn't work in Python, right? And you cannot open an HTTP URL like that. But you get the general sense. And then, okay, let's help it a bit, right? And I'm telling you, look, what you wrote doesn't work. Can you, use AWS Python SDK? because clearly, you cannot open S3 file like this, right? And it actually produces a correct result, right? So it's actually enabled to tell you how to do it. There's still some mistakes there, right? And there's no error handling, and it doesn't scale, and so forth. And the HTTP part, opening the JSON file is still wrong. But you get a sense of where this is going. And by the way, you get a sense of the high-level programming languages, right? Because reading this, there's a difference, right? For you as a human as well, to understand what's going on here versus what's going on here, right? And there's no error handling here and so forth, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is that, well, first, the AI-driven development is a reality. We're very close to it, right? We won't be able to keep up with AIs writing code in the current generation of programming languages for some specific use cases. I think we can do better, if anything, for our own sake, more than for the machine's sake. So with that in mind, right, so what's going to happen with APIs in 10 years? Well, the first thing that's going to happen, right, is that we will accelerate the production of APIs. There's something called the Jevons, I believe that's the pronunciation, paradox, that states that, as we get better using a resource, we actually end up using more of it. And that's actually a paradox, right? Because if computers get twice as fast, right, then you need half of them, right? But that's not what happens, right? They get twice as fast, and we find new reasons to use it, right? So an increase in efficiency accelerates consumption, and that's actually part of the problem with climate change as well, right? And with us, humans. We'll just find far more use cases, right? More API usages to get far more interconnection of products, systems, and services, right? We will use far more diverse tools in an open ecosystem. As long as the ecosystem is open, it makes sense to use the right tool optimized for the right job. So specialization is going to be key. I think something that's going to be new for software providers and for software users is that I don't think we'll fear lock-in anymore, right? Even come to our platform, you have to learn a DSL. Look, you're like one AI request away from migrating from it at the limit if you don't think we provide enough value, right? So I think lock-in is going to be perhaps something from the past, right? And developers, as you were seeing, right, will become much more drivers, will be responsible for understanding what's going on and for signing it off. I don't think we'll be doing as many keystrokes anymore, right? A lot more code reviews and less typing, in a sense. The other thing that I think is going to be very interesting, right, is that, again, I mentioned this before, I think impact is going to be much more important than design, right? We will worry less about fully consistent structures or very specific split of concerns or architecture, right? I think it's going to get a bit more organic, mostly because we'll have very incredible refactoring capabilities coming up. And that's actually a benefit if you think about it, right? A lot of what we do in architecture is often so that we can understand what's going on. But we'll have systems that will allow us to understand what's going on much better. And that will enable us to do things like, dumping APIs over the database. It's a bad practice, right? In general, it's a very bad idea. But sometimes for the business, in a particular situation, might be the right idea. But if you do that, you can't get away from it, right? Well, I think we will be able to. I think we have enough tooling that will be able to do, whatever is quick and dirty, whatever is more impactful than whatever is more, correct in architectural sense. And of course, the value then will be in deciding what we build, because we'll be able to pretty much build anything we fancy, right? And signing them off. And then there's going to be automation pretty much everywhere. So, this is the future we're building at Raw. So that's what we work on. That's our vision. We've experimented with AI-driven code development. We don't have it in any form of production, but that's really the camp that we are at. And if you actually want to learn more about what we do, we have a workshop tomorrow where we actually go through our platform, right? We're not going to convert everything to Python. We'll keep it in our platform. But at least you'll get to play with it. You'll get to build some APIs, put it in production. And it's tomorrow afternoon, I believe, room number 3, just there at 3:50.
Okay,
Thanks so much.
fantastic. Thanks very much.